Callan Reid did not just leave his wife. He made her watch him celebrate the woman he left her for. 2 months earlier, Callan had ended his marriage to Mara Voss on her 34th birthday, sitting across from her in a quiet restaurant, while a birthday candle burned beside a leather folder full of divorce papers. He did not raise his voice. He did not look ashamed. He simply told her their marriage was over, that he had outgrown the life they built, and that the woman he wanted now was Sienna Vale, Mara's best friend, the woman who once stood beside Mara at her wedding and called her sister. Then, before Mara could even learn how to breathe without him, Callan sent her another envelope. Not an apology, not a settlement correction, a wedding invitation. Callan Reid and Sienna Vale were getting married, and they wanted Mara in the room. The wedding hall was packed with family, old friends, investors, board members, and Reedline Solutions executives. People who knew Mara had stood beside Callan when he was still nobody. People who remembered her carrying boxes into the first office, reviewing contracts at midnight, and using her father's inheritance to save the company before it ever became successful. But none of them said that out loud. To them, Callan was the celebrated chief executive everyone admired. Sienna was the beautiful bride who had somehow turned betrayal into a love story. And Mara was the abandoned ex-wife, cruel enough to be invited, but expected to be too broken to matter. When she walked into the wedding hall wearing a simple black dress and carrying a small silver gift box, whispers moved through the room like smoke. She actually came. She must still want him. Poor woman. No one stood for her. No one defended her. No one knew that earlier that same morning, Mara had walked into a boardroom with her attorney and signed the papers Callan feared most. Not divorce papers. Ownership papers. The company paying for the flowers, the food, the music, the venue, and the perfect wedding image no longer belonged to Callan the way he thought it did. Because years before Callan became powerful, Mara's father had made one thing clear. If Mara's inheritance built Reedline Solutions, then Mara's name would remain in its foundation. Callan had signed that promise. Then he tried to bury it. So when Callan smiled in front of everyone and asked his ex-wife to bring out her wedding gift before the vows, Mara did not hesitate. She placed the silver box on the table between him and Sienna. Then she looked at the man who had divorced her on her birthday, invited her to his wedding, and believed she had come to be humiliated. Open it slowly, Mara said. That invitation was supposed to prove Mara had lost everything. Instead, it became the day Callan learned the woman he erased had been holding the foundation of his empire all along. Subscribe before we begin and tell me where you're watching from. If you have ever been underestimated by someone you helped rise, this story is going to hit deep. Mara Voss saw the message before her husband could hide it. It flashed across Callan Reid's phone while he sat at their kitchen table, drinking the coffee she had made exactly the way he liked it. Can't wait until she knows. For 1 second, Mara's hand froze on the edge of the breakfast tray. Then Callan turned the phone face down. Too fast. Too calmly. As if hiding things had become part of his morning routine. Mara did not ask him about it, not yet. She only looked at his face and searched for the man she had spent 10 years loving, protecting, and building a life with. Callan Reid was 36, polished, successful, and respected by people who only knew the finished version of him. His suits were expensive now. His watch was new. His name appeared on business magazines, company banners, and conference stages. But Mara remembered a different Callan. The one with tired eyes. The one who sat in an old car after failed investor meetings, gripping the steering wheel like the whole world had rejected him. The one who used to whisper, "What if I'm not enough?" when there was no audience left to impress. Mara was 34, soft-spoken, patient, and loyal in a way that made people underestimate how much she saw. She was not famous like Callan. She did not appear in interviews. She did not stand on stages. Most people knew her only as Callan Reed's wife. But before Callan had a company, before he had employees, before anyone called him a visionary, Mara had been there. She had been the one reading supplier contracts at midnight. She had been the one correcting investor slides when Callan's numbers did not match his promises. She had been the one calling vendors when payments were late. She had been the one whispering, "Try again," when he had nothing left but shame. Their home was quiet that morning, filled with warm kitchen light and the smell of coffee. Soft piano music played from the small speaker near the window. On the wall beside the home office door hung an old photograph that almost nobody noticed anymore. In the photo, Mara and Callan sat on the floor of an empty rented office. No desks, no staff, no money, just 2 paper cups, a cheap laptop, and a whiteboard behind them with the words, "REDLINE SOLUTIONS, Phase 1. Callan now told people he built Reedline Solutions alone. But the photo knew better. So did Mara. Years earlier, in their first year of marriage, Callan had almost given up. Back then, he was not powerful. He was a nervous young man with rejected proposals, unpaid bills, and a dream that looked foolish to everyone except Mara. One night, after an investor laughed at his business plan, Callan sat beside her in a dark parking lot and said, "I'm not made for this. Maybe I should quit." Mara reached for his hand. She had already worked a full day. Her feet hurt. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but she still smiled at him like his dream was not heavy. "Then we start smaller," she said, "but we don't stop." That same night, Mara opened the savings account her father, Ellis Voss, had left for her. Ellis Voss had been a quiet warehouse supervisor, the kind of man who came home with tired hands and honest eyes. He had never been rich, but he had saved carefully because he wanted Mara to have a future no one could take from her. Before he passed, Ellis had taught Mara 3 rules. Never sign what you do not understand. Never trust charm more than records. Never confuse sacrifice with weakness. Mara remembered the first 2. But somewhere in loving Callan, she forgot the 3rd. She used her inheritance to keep Reedline Solutions alive. Not because Callan forced her. Because she believed marriage meant carrying each other when one person was too tired to stand. But Ellis had refused to let love become paperwork without protection. Before Mara transferred the money, he paid a small-town attorney to draft a founder protection agreement. It stated that Mara's inheritance would be treated as seed capital, that her founding ownership could not be removed or diluted without her written consent, and that any future restructuring had to preserve her original rights unless she signed a separate waiver after independent legal review. Callan had signed it. He had held Mara's face in both hands afterward and promised, "Your name will always be protected. I swear, Mara, what you build with me will never be taken from you." The paper now sat in a drawer inside their home office, under old tax files, expired insurance forms, and faded company notes. Mara had not looked at it in years. She trusted him too much to need it. That was her mistake. Back in the kitchen, Callan barely looked at the supplier reports she had placed beside his plate. Mara had marked 3 problems with yellow sticky notes. 1 vendor had overcharged them. 1 shipment was delayed. 1 investor folder had a missing document that could slow down a board approval. These were the things she still fixed before he even noticed they were broken. Callan picked up 1 folder and frowned. "You reviewed these already?" Mara nodded. There were a few errors. He gave a short laugh, not cruel but careless. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Once, those words would have warmed her. That morning, they felt rehearsed. Mara sat across from him. "Don't forget tomorrow night," she said gently. Callan did not look up. "What's tomorrow?" Her heart dipped, but she kept her voice steady. My birthday dinner. For a moment, guilt crossed his face. Then it disappeared. Right, he said, of course. His phone buzzed again. This time, Mara saw only the sender's first letter before he snatched it away. Ez. Callan stood quickly, grabbing his briefcase. I have an early meeting. Mara watched him leave without finishing his coffee. At the door, he paused, smiled too smoothly, and said, You still trust me, right? Mara answered softly, Always. But after he left, the kitchen felt colder. The old photo on the wall seemed to stare back at her like a warning from a life she had forgotten to protect. And somewhere across town, someone with the initial S was waiting for Mara to finally find out. Sienna Vale walked into the private dining room, and Callan forgot how to look away. Mara saw it. It was only 1 second. Maybe less. But it was enough. Callan had been speaking to 2 board members from Readline Solutions when the door opened. The room was warm with soft lights, expensive flowers, low music, and the gentle sound of glasses touching. It was supposed to be a small company dinner, a quiet celebration before Mara's birthday the next day. But the moment Sienna entered, Callan's sentence broke in half. He looked at her like he had been waiting. Sienna smiled like she already knew. Mara stood near the table, holding a folded dinner menu in her hand. Her fingers tightened around the paper, but her face stayed calm. Sienna Vale was 34, stylish, charming, and bright in a way that made people notice her quickly. She was Mara's best friend, though best friend had never felt like a large enough phrase for what Sienna used to be. Sienna was not a stranger who wandered into Mara's marriage. She had been in Mara's life before Callan ever appeared. Mara met Sienna when they were 19. They were both young, broke, and trying to look braver than they felt. Mara had been quiet and careful. Sienna had been magnetic and restless, the kind of woman who could make a room laugh while hiding the fact that she went home lonely. Sienna came from a family that cared more about appearances than affection. Her mother corrected her clothes more than she hugged her. Her father praised success but ignored sadness. Sienna knew how to smile in public and fall apart in private. Mara became her safe place. When Sienna had no money for textbooks, Mara shared hers. When Sienna cried after her first serious breakup, Mara stayed awake all night beside her. When other women called Sienna dramatic or selfish, Mara defended her. When Sienna needed a dress for an interview, Mara gave her the only good one she owned. Years later, when Mara married Callan, Sienna stood beside her as maid of honor. That memory returned now as Sienna crossed the room. A flash of white lace. A mirror. Sienna's hands gently fixing Mara's veil. If he ever hurts you, Sienna had whispered on Mara's wedding day, smiling through tears, I'll make sure he regrets it. Mara had laughed then, because she believed her. Now watching Sienna walk toward Callan in a fitted wine-colored dress Mara had once complimented, that memory felt strange in Mara's chest. Sienna hugged Mara first. Too tightly. My beautiful Mara, she said, you look tired, have you been sleeping? It sounded caring, but it landed like an insult. Mara smiled softly, I'm fine. Sienna's eyes moved quickly across Mara's face, as if searching for cracks. Then she turned to Callan. Callan, she said warmly. Not Mr. Reed. Not even a polite greeting. Just his name, spoken with comfort. Callan stepped forward and kissed her cheek. Mara noticed that too. He did not hesitate. He did not ask himself if it looked too familiar. He simply did it, like his body already knew the habit. Dinner began. The table was long and elegant, filled with senior staff, 2 board members, and a few close friends. Callan sat at the head, wearing his public smile. Mara sat beside him, as she always did. Sienna chose the seat across from Callan, close enough to be seen, far enough to deny anything. At first, everything sounded normal. People spoke about numbers, expansion, contracts, suppliers, and the upcoming Eastbridge launch. Mara listened quietly. She had reviewed most of the reports that morning before Callan even left the house. She knew which shipment was delayed. She knew which vendor had overcharged them. She knew which investor packet was missing a signature. Then Sienna lifted her glass and said, "I hope the Eastbridge supply issue doesn't delay the launch." Mara looked up. Callan's fork paused. The Eastbridge issue had not been mentioned at the table. Mara turned to Sienna. "How did you hear about that?" For half a second, Sienna's smile came too fast. "Oh," she said lightly, "Callan mentioned it, probably forgot to tell you." The table stayed polite. But Mara felt the words settle over her like cold dust. "Callan mentioned it. Forgot to tell you." It was small enough that no one could call it cruel, but it placed Sienna inside Callan's private world and Mara outside it. Mara glanced at Callan. He did not defend her. He only took a drink of water. Across the table, Owen Bell watched quietly. Owen Bell was 41, Readline's operations manager, and one of the few employees who remembered the company before it became successful. He had seen Mara carry boxes into the first office. He had seen her bring food to exhausted workers. He had seen her solve problems Callan later took credit for. Owen looked uncomfortable. His eyes moved from Sienna's hand to Callan's face. Sienna's hand was resting on the back of Callan's chair. Not on his shoulder. Not on his arm. Just close enough to look innocent. Just close enough to look like ownership. Callan laughed at something Sienna said. Sienna finished one of his sentences. Callan remembered exactly how she liked her drink. Mara noticed all of it. But love has a terrible way of protecting the person who hurts you. It whispers excuses before truth can speak. Maybe they were just close. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe the message from that morning had nothing to do with Sienna. Then Callan's phone buzzed. He looked at it under the table. Sienna looked down at her own phone almost immediately after. Their eyes met. Only for a breath. Then both looked away. Mara's stomach tightened. Later, when dessert arrived, Mara excused herself to the restroom. She needed quiet. She needed 1 minute where she did not have to smile like nothing inside her was shaking. Inside the restroom, she leaned against the sink and looked at herself in the mirror. Tomorrow was her birthday. Callan had promised dinner. Maybe, she told herself, tomorrow would fix the distance between them. Maybe he would remember who they used to be. Then she heard Sienna's voice outside the restroom door. "Lo, Job. Not sweet anymore." "No," Sienna whispered into her phone. "She has no idea." Mara stopped breathing. A pause. Then Sienna said, even softer, "After tomorrow, everything changes." Mara opened the restroom door. Sienna froze. Her phone was still in her hand. For one long second, neither woman moved. Then Sienna smiled. "Oh," she said, "I didn't know you were in there." Mara looked at the woman who had once promised to protect her from heartbreak. And behind that smile, Mara felt tomorrow waiting like a trap. The leather folder hit the restaurant table, and Mara Voss knew before she opened it that her life had already changed. Callan Reed sat across from her with no flowers, no smile, and no warmth in his eyes. For one long second, Mara could only stare at the folder between them. It looked too neat, too expensive, too final. A small birthday candle flickered beside her untouched glass of water, its flame shaking like it was afraid to stay alive in the silence. Mara forced a nervous smile. "You brought work to my birthday." Callan did not smile back. His voice was calm when he answered. No, I brought clarity. The word landed harder than anger would have. Mara's fingers moved slowly toward the folder, but her hand felt strangely weak. She was 34 years old that day, a woman who had spent 10 years loving one man, building one home, protecting one dream. She had woken that morning with fear in her stomach because of Sienna's words outside the restroom the night before. She has no idea. After tomorrow, everything changes. Mara had tried not to believe it. All day she had tried. She had stood in front of her closet for nearly 20 minutes before choosing the simple blue dress hanging near the back. It was not new, it was not expensive, but Callan once told her it made her look like the calm before every good thing. That memory had been enough to make her wear it. Years earlier, on their first wedding anniversary, Callan had taken her to a small diner because that was all they could afford. Reedline Solutions was still just a dream then. Their bills were late. Their office had no real furniture. Callan had given her a cheap silver bracelet from a discount counter and looked ashamed as he placed it in her palm. I wanted to give you more, he had said. Mara had smiled and touched his face. Build something honest with me, she told him. That's enough. That was the kind of woman Mara had been. She never needed diamonds. She never asked for luxury. She only wanted honesty. Now, in the restaurant's golden candlelight, she opened the folder. The first line blurred before her eyes. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Beneath it sat a proposed settlement agreement. Her body went cold. For a moment, the sounds around her faded. The low music disappeared. The soft laughter from other tables became distant. Even the waiter moving behind Callan seemed to slow down. Mara looked up. Callan, she whispered. He straightened in his chair like he had practiced this conversation in a mirror. I think we both know this marriage hasn't been working. Mara blinked once, then twice. We both know. Callan looked away, then back at her. You became comfortable, Mara. You stopped wanting more. The words were quiet, but each one cut into years of sacrifice. Comfortable. Was that what he called the nights she stayed awake, correcting his proposals? Was that what he called the inheritance she gave him when his company almost failed? Was that what he called standing beside him when no one else believed his name mattered? Mara swallowed, but her throat felt tight. I helped you build everything you have. Callan's face hardened slightly. And I'm grateful, but gratitude isn't a marriage. Mara stared at him. There it was. The clean little sentence he would use to wash his hands of her. He continued, his voice controlled and almost bored. We want different lives now. I need someone who understands where I'm going. Mara's heart began to pound. There was something behind those words. Someone she already knew before he said it. Still, some part of her begged silently for him not to say the name. Callan looked down at the table. There's someone else. Mara did not move. He breathed out. Sienna. The room seemed to tilt. Suddenly, memories rushed through Mara's mind faster than she could stop them. Sienna holding her wedding bouquet. Sienna sleeping on her couch after a breakup, crying into Mara's sweater. Sienna calling her my sister. Sienna adjusting her veil and promising that if Callan ever hurt her, he would regret it. Mara could almost hear Sienna's laugh from the company dinner the night before. Callan mentioned it. Probably forgot to tell you. Mara's lips parted, but no sound came out. Callan leaned forward. We didn't plan it. That lie almost made Mara laugh, but the pain was too deep for laughter. She remembered Sienna's whisper outside the restroom. After tomorrow, everything changes. They had planned something. Maybe not love. But certainly this. At that moment, a young waiter approached their table, carrying a tiny birthday cake. His name tag read Ethan. Ethan Cole was barely 20, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. Mara had quietly ordered the cake earlier because she thought she and Callan would share it after dinner. Ethan began softly, "Happy birth." Then he saw the papers. His smile faded. The candle on the cake trembled in his hand. Mara looked at the small cake, then back at Callan. "On my birthday?" she asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Callan sighed, like her pain was an inconvenience. "I didn't want to drag this out." That was the moment something inside Mara went silent. Not healed, not stronger, just silent. Callan slid a pen beside the papers. "My lawyer said if you don't contest it, this can be finished quickly. The settlement is simple. You keep the apartment, your personal accounts, and a support payment. Readline remains separate corporate property." Mara stared at him. "Separate corporate property." He said it too smoothly, like a line rehearsed by someone who needed her not to ask questions. "I don't care about the company tonight," Mara whispered. "I know," Callan said. And somehow that hurt worse. Because he knew she was too wounded to think clearly. He knew grief could make a person sign away questions they would have asked on a stronger day. Mara did not sign. She closed the folder slowly and pushed it back toward him. "If you want to leave," she said, her voice shaking, "then leave, but don't ask me to bless it while my birthday candle is still burning." For the first time, irritation broke through Callan's calm. "You always make things emotional." Mara looked at the cake in Ethan's hand. "No," she said, "you made it cruel." Callan stood, buttoning his jacket with the same hands Mara had held through every failure. "I'll have my lawyer contact you," he said. Then he turned and walked away. But as he reached for his coat, something slipped from the pocket and fell near Mara's chair. A receipt. Mara picked it up with shaking fingers. It was from a hotel suite. 2 names were written by hand near the bottom. C. Reed plus S. Vale. And the date was 3 months earlier. 3 months. Mara sat alone beside the untouched birthday cake, staring at proof that her marriage had ended long before Callan had the courage to say it. Across the room, the restaurant doors closed behind him. The candle burned lower. Ethan stood frozen beside the table, unsure whether to leave the cake or take it away. Mara looked at the flame. Then she blew it out herself. And somewhere, before Mara could even understand the wound, another envelope was already waiting to arrive. The gold envelope arrived like an insult. Mara Voss stood in the doorway of her apartment, staring at the courier's hand as if he had brought something poisonous wrapped in beauty. The envelope was thick, expensive, and sealed with white wax. Her name was written across the front in perfect script. Mara Voss. Not Mrs. Reed. Not anymore. The divorce had moved faster than her healing. Callan's lawyers had pushed hard. Mara had been too exhausted to fight every line. The court decree had come through weeks later, ending the marriage officially, while several financial disclosures remained under review because Dorian Hale had refused to close the file completely. Callan thought the divorce was finished. Mara thought the worst of him had already been revealed. Both of them were wrong. The courier, a young man in a dark delivery jacket, gave her a polite smile. "Signature required, ma'am." Mara's fingers tightened around the pen. For one strange second, she thought it might be more legal paperwork from the divorce. Maybe Callan had found one last way to take something from her, one last document, one last signature, one last reminder that the man she built a life with had walked away on her birthday, as if 10 years could be folded into a leather folder and left on a restaurant table. She signed. The courier left, and Mara stood alone with the envelope in her hands. 2 months had passed since that night. 2 months since Callan Reed placed divorce papers beside her birthday candle. 2 months since Mara found the hotel receipt with his name and Sienna Vale's name written together 3 months before the divorce. But time had not healed her. It had only made her quieter. Her apartment looked clean, but not alive. The curtains stayed half-closed. The kitchen table had 1 chair pulled out instead of 2. The coffee machine still made enough for Callan some mornings because Mara's hands remembered habits her heart was trying to forget. Sometimes she woke before sunrise and reached across the bed. There was no one there. Sometimes she typed a message to Callan. "How could you do this to me?" Then she deleted it. Sometimes she opened Sienna's contact and stared at the old photo beside her name. 2 smiling women, arms around each other, a friendship that once felt safer than family. Then Mara locked the phone and placed it face down. She had stopped answering mutual friends too. Some sent gentle messages, some asked questions they had no right to ask, some pretended to care, but Mara could feel their curiosity underneath. "Did you know? Were there signs? Are you okay seeing them together?" No, Mara was not okay. But she had learned that people liked broken women better when they broke quietly. Social media became the cruelest room in the world. Sienna posted constantly. A photo of her hand wearing a diamond ring. A photo of Callan kissing her forehead. A photo of them laughing under white flowers. The caption under one picture said, "Sometimes love finds its way through impossible circumstances." Mara read it 3 times. Impossible circumstances. That was what Sienna called betrayal. Not betrayal. Not lies. Not months of hiding. A love story. Callan was no better. He appeared in a business interview wearing a calm smile and a navy suit Mara had helped him choose years ago. The interviewer asked him how he balanced personal change with professional success. Callan smiled like a man who had survived something noble. "Life is about choosing happiness," he said. Mara closed the laptop so hard the room seemed to jump. Because she remembered a different Callan. Years earlier, before Readline Solutions had power, Callan feared public shame more than anything. After one investor called him small time in front of a full conference room, Callan sat in their car and cried with his face in his hands. He was not embarrassed only about failing. He was embarrassed that people had seen him fail. Mara had not judged him. She had driven them home, made strong coffee, and stayed awake until morning rebuilding his entire presentation. She rewrote the opening, reorganized the numbers, and added supplier projections he had forgotten to include. The next week, Callan won his first serious investor meeting. Later, he called it his breakthrough. He never mentioned Mara's name. Now the same man who once shook from public shame was using public image to shame her. That was the part that hurt in a deeper place. Callan knew exactly what humiliation felt like. And he still chose to give it to her. Mara finally broke the wax seal on the envelope. Inside was a wedding invitation. At first, her mind refused to understand it. The paper was cream-colored, bordered with gold. The letters were raised and elegant. Callan Reed and Sienna Vale request the honor of your presence as they celebrate their marriage. Mara stopped breathing. The date was only 3 weeks away. Too soon. Too planned. Too cruel. Only 2 months after Callan had served divorce papers on her birthday, he was marrying the woman he claimed he had not planned to love. Mara sat down slowly. Her hands trembled, but she did not cry at first. Then a smaller card slipped from the envelope and landed near her knee. It was handwritten. Sienna's handwriting. Mara knew it instantly. I hope one day you understand that some love stories are meant to happen, even if they hurt others first. That was when Mara's control cracked. Not because Callan was marrying Sienna. Not even because Sienna had betrayed her. But because they wanted Mara to watch. The invitation was not kindness. It was not maturity. It was not peace. It was a stage. They wanted her seated in a room full of guests while they smiled over the wreckage of her life. They wanted witnesses. They wanted whispers. They wanted Mara's pain dressed up as forgiveness. Mara pressed the invitation against her chest and let out a sound that did not feel like crying at first. It felt like something being pulled from deep inside her. She slid to the floor beside the trash can. For a long time, she stayed there. Then slowly, she stood. Her face changed. Not healed. Not strong. Just still. She looked at the gold invitation one final time and dropped it into the trash. The second it landed, her phone rang. Mara flinched. The name on the screen was Dorian Hale. Dorian Hale was 48, calm, sharp, and careful with every word. He was the divorce attorney who had helped Mara survive the legal ending of her marriage. He was not warm exactly, but he was steady. The kind of man who noticed missing pages, strange dates, and signatures that did not belong where they were placed. Mara answered, her voice weak. Dorian. His tone was controlled, but urgent. Mara, did Callan ever ask you to sign a separate waiver, giving up your original founder shares? Mara froze. The apartment went silent around her. What founder shares? Dorian paused. And in that pause, Mara felt the first crack open under Callan's perfect life. Then Dorian said, you need to come to my office immediately. There's something in the company records he never expected anyone to compare. The first document on Dorian Hale's desk had Mara Voss's signature on it. The second had Callan Reed. The third had her father's handwriting in the margin. Mara stood frozen in the doorway of the law office, her coat still hanging from one shoulder, staring at the papers like they had been waiting years to accuse someone. Dorian did not tell her to sit right away. He knew better. His office did not feel like a place for ending a marriage anymore. It felt like a room where a buried truth had finally been brought above ground. Mara, he said gently, I need you to look at this before I explain. She stepped closer. On the page, under a title she barely remembered, were the words, Founder Protection Agreement. Her breath caught. She had not seen that phrase in years. Dorian pulled out a chair for her. This was not included properly in Callan's divorce disclosures. It should have been. Mara sat slowly. I don't understand. I thought the divorce was finished. The marriage is finished, Dorian said. The financial truth may not be. If a spouse conceals major assets or misrepresents ownership, the court can reopen parts of the settlement. And in this case, the company records raise a bigger issue than the divorce. He opened another folder. Inside were bank statements, old incorporation records, scanned emails, and a faded copy of a check from Mara's inheritance account. The check had been written 10 years earlier, when Reedline Solutions was not yet a company people admired. It was only an idea Callan could not afford to keep alive. Dorian tapped the amount. This was the original seed money. Mara stared at it. She knew that already, in a quiet part of herself. But seeing it on paper made the past feel real again. Her father, Ellis Voss, had left her that money. Ellis had not been rich. He had worked for 30 years as a warehouse supervisor, the kind of man who carried his lunch in the same old bag and repaired his shoes instead of buying new ones. He smelled like soap, coffee, and cardboard dust. He spoke slowly because he believed careless words caused careless lives. When Mara was younger, Ellis taught her 3 rules. Never sign what you do not understand. Never trust charm more than records. Never confuse sacrifice with weakness. Mara had remembered the first two, but she had mistaken the third for selfishness. The memory returned clearly. Callan was 26 then, sitting at Ellis's kitchen table with nervous hands and a dream too big for his bank account. He had asked Mara to invest in Readline Solutions, though he hated calling it an investment. He called it faith. Ellis had listened quietly. He did not dislike Callan, but he did not trust ambition when it came wearing desperation. After Callan finished speaking, Ellis looked at Mara and said, "If your money builds the foundation, your name stays in the foundation." Callan had nodded quickly. "Of course, sir, absolutely." So Ellis paid a small-town attorney to draft a founder protection agreement. It stated that Mara's inheritance would secure her founding interest in Readline Solutions, and that her ownership could not be removed, transferred, or diluted without her clear written consent and independent legal acknowledgement. Mara signed. Callan signed. Ellis signed as witness. Then Ellis placed his hand over Mara's and said, "Love him if you choose, but don't disappear inside him." Back in Dorian's office, Mara pressed her fingers to her mouth. She had disappeared anyway. Dorian slid another paper toward her. "This is where the problem begins." It was an amended company filing from 5 years later, when Readline had finally become profitable. Mara remembered that year. Callan had begun wearing better suits. Investors returned his calls. People who once ignored him started calling him brilliant. He had brought home a stack of papers and told Mara they were routine legal updates. "It's just legal cleanup," he had said, kissing the top of her head. "The investors want the structure simplified. You know I'd never take what belongs to you." Mara had signed where he pointed. She had trusted the man more than the records. Now Dorian showed her the truth. "Those documents made it look like you were stepping back from daily operations," he said, "but they did not legally remove your original founder rights. There is no separate waiver, no independent acknowledgement, no clean transfer. Callan used later filings to present your ownership as inactive, then treated that as if it no longer existed." Mara shook her head slowly. "So he erased me." Dorian's voice softened. "He tried to." The room felt colder. Dorian continued. During the final divorce review, his assistant found something strange in Callan's disclosures. "Tessa Grant flagged it first," Dorian said. Tessa Grant was 29, new to Dorian's firm, and known for catching small inconsistencies senior lawyers sometimes missed. She had compared Callan's company valuation against old incorporation records and noticed that Mara's name appeared in early documents but vanished from later summaries without the required transfer record. Tessa found one missing schedule, then one altered date, then a chain of documents Callan had never expected anyone to compare. That was how the paper trail reopened. And it did not stop at ownership. Dorian laid out more evidence. Callan had moved marital assets into accounts Mara had not been told about before the divorce. He had used company-linked funds for personal expenses connected to Sienna Vale. Hotel charges, jewelry deposits, private travel, even a wedding venue payment dated before the divorce was finalized. Mara's face went still. Dorian watched her carefully. "There is more." He introduced 3 names. Owen Bell, Readline's operations manager, had seen Callan and Sienna using company resources after hours. Owen had been loyal to the company since its early days and remembered Mara's role clearly. Clara Mays, a former accountant, had been fired after questioning missing funds. Nolan Pierce, a cybersecurity consultant, had recovered deleted internal emails showing that Callan knew Mara's founder rights was still a threat. Each name was not just evidence. Each name was a piece of the life Callan had tried to bury. Mara did not feel powerful. She felt sick. Every document proved one thing. Callan had not simply fallen out of love. He had prepared to erase her while she was still making his coffee, reviewing his reports, and reminding him about meetings. Dorian opened the final folder. "This is a proposed emergency board motion," he said. "If the board approves it, your founder rights are restored in the company records. Callan is suspended from executive authority pending investigation, and temporary controlling authority transfers to you while the court confirms the ownership dispute." Mara stared at him. "Owner?" The word felt too large to touch. Then Dorian's expression darkened. "But if Callan finds out before the vote, he may destroy records, pressure witnesses, or move whatever money remains. That is why we have to act before he realizes the divorce file is still alive." Mara looked down. Inside her purse, the gold wedding invitation waited like a dare. Her voice was quiet when she asked, "When is the vote?" Dorian paused. "The morning of his wedding." Mara closed her eyes. And for the first time since her birthday, the silence around her did not feel empty. It felt like something gathering strength. Mara Voss saw the honeymoon deposit before she saw the hotel receipts. For a moment, she could not breathe. The document sat under the bright white light of Dorian Hale's conference room, plain and unforgiving. It was only a payment record, only numbers and dates printed on a page, but to Mara, it felt like the final proof that her marriage had been buried while she was still living inside it. The deposit had been made 4 weeks before Callan gave her divorce papers. 4 weeks before her birthday. 4 weeks before he sat across from her in that restaurant and pretended his betrayal had simply happened. The payment had not come from Callan's personal account. That was the part Dorian wanted her to see. It had been routed through a Readline Solutions vendor account and labeled Executive Client Retreat Deposit. Mara stared at the words until they stopped looking like words. Across from her sat Clara Mays. Clara Mays was a woman in her early 40s with tired eyes, a plain grey jacket, and the careful posture of someone who had learned that telling the truth could cost a person everything. She had once been Readline Solutions' senior accountant, the kind of employee who checked receipts twice, questioned strange transfers, and remembered numbers other people hoped would be forgotten. Dorian had introduced her simply. "This is Clara Mays. She handled internal expense reviews before Callan fired her." Clara looked at Mara with quiet regret. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have come forward sooner." Mara did not answer right away. She had stopped expecting apologies to heal anything. Clara slid another folder across the table. These were listed as client hospitality expenses. Mara opened it. Hotel suites, private dinners, jewelry deposits, spa appointments, luxury travel, then the honeymoon deposit. All paid through company-linked accounts, all hidden under false business labels, all connected to Callan and Sienna. Clara pointed to one receipt. "This was the first one that made me question him. The location did not match any client meeting. When I asked for clarification, Callan told me I was becoming difficult." Her voice tightened. 2 weeks later, I was fired." Mara looked at the papers, then at Clara. "You lost your job because of this." Clara gave a sad smile. "I lost my job because I asked where the money was going." The room went quiet. Mara had thought proof would make her loud. She had imagined that if she ever saw the truth on paper, she would shake, scream, demand answers. But she did none of those things. She became still. That stillness frightened even her. After Clara left, Mara sat alone for a moment. Dorian watched her from the other side of the table. He was careful not to rush her. "You don't have to keep going today," he said. Mara looked down at the honeymoon deposit again. Yes, she said softly, I do. That night, she met Owen Bell in a closed storage office at Readline Solutions. Owen was 41, broad-shouldered, loyal, and worn down by years of keeping things inside. He had worked at Readline since the early days, back when the company had more unpaid bills than employees. He remembered Mara carrying boxes, answering phones, and staying late to help staff who were too embarrassed to ask Callan for help. Owen did not sit at first. He stood near the shelves, rubbing his hands together. I should have said something, he said. Mara's face softened. About what? Owen looked toward the door, even though Dorian had made sure no one else was nearby. Sienna, he said, she was coming here late, months before the divorce. Mara's chest tightened. How late? After everyone left, sometimes after 10, sometimes closer to midnight. Mara turned away slightly. Not because she did not believe him. Because she did. Owen continued, At first I told myself it was business. Callan said she was helping with image strategy before the expansion campaign. Then I saw expense requests, private dinners, hotel transportation, venue consultation fees, things that had nothing to do with company work. Why didn't you report it? Mara asked. Owen looked ashamed. Because Callan threatened my job. He said if I caused trouble, he would blame the Eastbridge supply losses on me. Mara remembered Owen at the company dinner, watching Callan and Sienna with discomfort in his eyes. You started saving emails, she said. Owen nodded. When he began blaming staff for missing funds, I knew someone needed proof. He handed her a flash drive. Everything I have is there. Mara took it carefully, as if it were made of glass. The next piece came from Nolan Pierce. Nolan Pierce was 32, quiet, sharp, and awkward in the way people sometimes were when they trusted computers more than people. He was a cybersecurity consultant Dorian had hired to recover deleted company messages from archived servers. He wore black-rimmed glasses and spoke in short, clear sentences. In Dorian's office, Nolan connected his laptop to the screen. I recovered several deleted email chains and internal chat backups, he said. Most are financial, but one message matters more than the rest. He clicked. A message appeared on the screen. It was from Sienna. Once the divorce is done, make sure Mara can't touch the company. She'll never fight you, but don't leave loose ends. Mara read it once. Then again. Then a third time. She'll never fight you. There it was. The truth underneath all their cruelty. They had not only betrayed her. They had counted on her silence. Suddenly, Mara remembered the afternoon after the divorce filing when Sienna came to her apartment with flowers and fake tears. Sienna had sat beside her on the couch, hugged her tightly, and whispered, You're stronger than me. I could never survive something like this. At the time, Mara thought Sienna was comforting her. Now she understood. Sienna had been checking the damage. She wanted to know if Mara suspected anything. She wanted to see if Mara was broken enough to stay quiet. Mara slowly stood from the table. Her grief had changed shape. At first, she had wanted to ask why. Why Callan stopped loving her. Why Sienna betrayed her. Why they chose her birthday. But now she understood that why would not save her. The real question was different. How do you stop protecting the people who destroyed you? Mara did not confront Callan. She did not call Sienna. She did not post a single word online. Instead, she copied records, signed witness statements, reviewed timelines, and learned how to move without making noise. Dorian filed emergency notices to preserve company documents. Nolan secured the recovered emails. Clara prepared a sworn statement about the false expense categories. Owen identified the staff members Callan had pressured or blamed. And Mara read every page, every receipt, every signature, every place where Callan had turned her trust into a hiding place. For the first time, her silence was not weakness. It was strategy. Late that night, as Mara sat alone with the gold wedding invitation beside the evidence folders, her phone rang. Dorian's name appeared on the screen. She answered. His voice was low. "The board will vote," he said, "but there is a problem." Mara's fingers tightened around the phone. "What problem?" "Callan has one loyal director who may warn him before we finish." Mara stared at the wedding invitation. "Who?" Dorian paused. Then he said, "Someone who stood at your wedding years ago and toasted loyalty." And in the silence that followed, Mara realized the betrayal had reached further than she ever imagined. Mara Voss received Callan's message just as the elevator doors opened. "Hope seeing us happy gives you closure." For 1 second, the words burned in her hand. Not because they hurt more than the divorce papers. Not because they hurt more than Sienna's betrayal. But because Callan still believed he was the one holding the final page of her story. Mara did not reply. She turned her phone off, stepped out of the elevator, and walked into the top floor of Reedline Solutions. It was the morning of Callan Reed and Sienna Vale's wedding. Somewhere across town, Callan was probably standing in front of a mirror, adjusting a perfect suit, smiling like a man who had won. He believed Mara was home, broken and quiet. He believed the company was safe. He believed the woman he had erased would never know where to look for her own name. But Mara was not walking into that building as his ex-wife. She was walking in as a founder. The boardroom had glass walls, polished floors, and a long dark table that reflected every face seated around it. 7 board members waited inside. Some looked annoyed. Some looked nervous. Some refused to meet Mara's eyes. They had all known Callan as the face of Reedline. Only a few remembered Mara as the woman who had carried boxes into the first office, answered phones when they had no receptionist, and stayed late to help employees who were too afraid to bother Callan. Dorian Hale stood beside her. He was calm and sharp, holding a thick folder against his chest. Owen Bell stood near the back wall, tense but steady. At the far end of the table sat Bren Cole. Bren Cole was 52, a longtime board director and one of Callan's oldest professional allies. He had attended Mara and Callan's wedding years earlier, smiling in every photo, calling them the future of the company. Mara remembered him lifting a glass that night and saying, "To loyalty." Now he looked at her like loyalty had a price. Dorian began without drama. "This emergency meeting has been called under the company's governance rules due to evidence of ownership concealment, misuse of company funds, and incomplete disclosure during divorce proceedings." A few board members shifted in their seats. Dorian placed the first document on the table. The original Founder Protection Agreement. Mara's eyes dropped to the page. Her father's signature was there. Ellis Voss. Strong, simple handwriting. Dorian continued. The inheritance funding record proving Mara Voss supplied the original seed capital. He placed down another paper. Later ownership amendments showing missing consent forms, irregular dates, and no independent waiver from Mara Voss. Another. Expense records showing company-linked funds used for private hotel suites, jewelry, dinners, and wedding-related deposits. The room grew colder. One board member whispered, "Wedding deposits." Dorian did not look up before the divorce was finalized. Mara stayed still. But inside, the words pressed deep. Before the divorce was finalized. Before Callan sat across from her on her birthday. Before he said he did not want to drag this out. He had already been planning a new life while she was still protecting the old one. Dorian placed more evidence on the table. Deleted emails recovered by Nolan Pierce. Witness statements from Clara Mays. Saved messages from Owen Bell. Then one printed line from Sienna Vale. Once the divorce is done, make sure Mara can't touch the company. She'll never fight you, but don't leave loose ends. Silence fell hard. Mara looked through the glass wall toward the main office. For a moment, the polished floor disappeared in her mind. She remembered the same building years earlier, before the renovation, when the walls were bare and the air smelled like dust and paint. She had been younger then, kneeling on the floor with a roller in her hand because they could not afford painters. Callan had come up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed her temple. One day, he had said, your name will be on everything I build. Back in the present, Dorian's voice cut through the memory. Legally, he said, it should have been. Mara swallowed. She did not smile. This was not victory yet. It was proof of how long she had been made invisible. Then Bren Cole pushed back his chair. I need a moment, he said. Mara saw the phone already in his hand. Dorian's eyes sharpened. Mr. Cole, Dorian said, this meeting is subject to confidentiality until the vote is recorded. Bren gave a thin smile. I know how board meetings work. He stepped into the hallway anyway. Through the glass, Mara saw his thumb moving fast across the screen. Her stomach tightened. If Callan found out before the vote, he could move money, pressure witnesses, warn Sienna, or destroy whatever evidence remained. Owen moved before anyone else did. He stepped into the hallway and stood in front of Bren. No shouting. No scene. Just a quiet sentence through the glass. If you warn Callan, Owen said, your own signatures go to investigators too. Bren froze. Owen held his gaze. You signed off on 3 reports you never reviewed. I saved those 2. Bren's face lost color. Slowly, he lowered the phone. A moment later, he returned to the boardroom and sat down without saying another word. The vote began. One by one, the board members raised their hands. Callan Reed was suspended from acting executive authority pending investigation. Mara Voss's founder rights were restored in the company records. Emergency controlling authority transferred to her while the court reviewed and confirmed the ownership dispute. The motion passed. Everyone waited for Mara to smile. She did not. Instead, she looked at Dorian and asked, what happens to the employees if this goes public? The question changed the room. Because even now, after everything, Mara was thinking about the people Callan had used to protect himself. Dorian's expression softened. We control the release carefully. The company survives. Callan does not control it anymore. Mara nodded once. Dorian then handed her a sealed silver box. Inside were copies of the final documents, the board resolution, the termination notice, the founder restoration record, the asset freeze request, and the agreement her father had protected years ago. You don't have to go to the wedding, Dorian said. Mara looked at the box, then at the gold invitation inside her purse. Yes, she said quietly, I do. He invited me to witness his new life. She closed her hand around the box. It's only fair he witnesses mine. And across town, Callan Reed was already smiling for wedding photos, unaware that the gift heading toward him carried every truth he had tried to bury. The entire wedding hall turned to look when Mara Voss walked in. The music did not stop. The bride did not turn around right away. The guests did not rise from their gold chairs. But something in the room changed the moment Mara stepped through the doors carrying the sealed silver box. Whispers moved faster than the soft piano playing near the altar. Is that her? Why would she come? She must still love him. This is embarrassing. Mara heard enough to know what they expected. They expected swollen eyes, a shaking voice, a woman still bleeding from the birthday divorce. But Mara did not give them that. She wore a simple black dress, not loud, not revealing, not begging to be noticed. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her face was calm, her steps were slow and steady. That calmness made people stare harder. The wedding venue was beautiful in a way that felt cruel. White orchids covered the aisle. Mara's favorite flowers. Gold chairs lined both sides of the room. Soft lights hung from the ceiling like tiny stars. On a large table near the entrance sat a 3-layer cake with vanilla almond frosting. Mara knew that flavor. She had chosen it years ago for her own wedding to Callan because he once said it tasted like home. The first dance song played quietly through the speakers while guests found their seats. Mara recognized it before the chorus. It was the same song she and Callan had danced to as husband and wife. For a moment, the room blurred. Not because she wanted Callan back, but because every detail felt stolen. Sienna Vale had not only taken Mara's husband. She had copied pieces of Mara's life and dressed them in white. The orchids, the song, the cake. Even the small pearl pins in Sienna's hair looked like the ones Mara had worn years before. This was not love. This was replacement. At the front of the hall stood Callan Reed, 36, handsome, polished, and proud in a dark wedding suit. He smiled at guests like a man who believed the day belonged to him. Beside him stood Sienna, 34, glowing under her veil, her smile bright enough to hide the sharpness underneath. Callan saw Mara first. His smile widened. Not warmly, triumphantly. He left Sienna's side and walked toward Mara with the smooth confidence of a man who thought he understood the ending. Mara, he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, I'm surprised you came. Mara looked at him. You invited me. A few guests shifted in their seats. Callan lowered his voice, but not enough. I didn't think you'd be brave enough. Mara's eyes stayed on his. You never did. The words were quiet, but they landed with weight. For a second, Callan's smile tightened. He looked at the silver box in her hand. What's that? A gift, Mara said. His mouth curved again. That's mature of you. Mara did not answer. Because the gift was not maturity. It was memory. It carried her father's handwriting, Callan's signature, the board's decision, and every buried document he had believed would never rise again. Sienna appeared beside them then, moving gracefully, as if she had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. Mara, she said sweetly, you came. Before Mara could step back, Sienna hugged her. It was a performance hug. Soft arms, cold heart, the kind meant to be seen by everyone in the room. Against Mara's ear, Sienna whispered, you should have let go sooner. Maybe this wouldn't hurt so much. Mara stood still. Then she whispered back, it won't hurt me much longer. Sienna pulled away. For the first time that day, confusion touched her face. Mara saw it. So did Callan. But before either of them could ask anything, the doors opened again. Dorian Hale entered. The attorney's presence was quiet but sharp. He wore a dark suit and carried no smile. A few business guests recognized him and immediately looked toward Callan. Then Owen Bell entered. The loyal operations manager who had seen too much and stayed silent too long. After him came Clara Mays, the former accountant Callan had fired for asking questions. Then two board members walked in separately, their faces serious, their eyes avoiding Callan. Mara watched Callan notice each one. His confidence, did not disappear all at once. It cracked slowly. First his jaw tightened. Then his eyes narrowed. Then he looked at Mara's silver box again. "What is this?" he asked under his breath. Mara held his gaze. "A wedding gift." Sienna forced a laugh. "Well, isn't that sweet?" But her voice had lost some of its shine. The efficient Arthur Grant stepped forward with a nervous smile. Arthur Grant was a middle-aged civil celebrant hired to guide the ceremony. He did not know Mara. He did not know about Reedline's board meeting. He did not know the room was no longer waiting for vows, but for a reckoning. He tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "before the vows, the couple requested a brief gift, blessing from close family and friends." Sienna's smile returned. This was clearly her idea. She wanted Mara's gift displayed before everyone. She wanted the guests to see Mara pretending to bless the marriage that had humiliated her. Callan seemed to recover too. He looked around the room, enjoying the attention. Then he raised his voice. "Mara brought something," he said. "Let's see if she finally learned how to celebrate other people's happiness." A few guests laughed. Not fully. Nervously. Dorian did not laugh. Owen looked down. Clara's face hardened. Mara walked to the head table. Every step made the room quieter. The soft music continued, but it sounded farther away now. She placed the silver box in front of Callan and Sienna. Her hand rested on the lid for one brief second. She thought of her father. She thought of the first empty office. She thought of birthday candles beside divorce papers. Then she removed her hand. Callan reached for the white ribbon. And just before he pulled it open, Mara said softly, "Read every page carefully." The room held its breath. And Callan smiled, still not understanding that the last thing he would ever open as a powerful man was tied with a ribbon. Callan Reed pulled the white ribbon loose, and the whole wedding hall seemed to stop breathing. He still had a smirk on his face. That was the part Mara noticed most. Not his hands. Not the silver box. Not the guests leaning forward in their gold chairs. His smirk. The same smirk he had worn when he told her on her birthday that he had brought clarity. The same smirk he had worn when he invited her to watch him marry her best friend. The same smirk that said he still believed Mara Voss was too soft, too loyal, too broken to ever stand against him. Sienna Vale stood beside him in her white dress, one hand resting lightly on his arm. She looked pleased, almost glowing. To her, this was supposed to be the final scene of Mara's humiliation. The ex-wife brings a gift. The groom laughs. The bride wins. But when Callan lifted the lid of the box, the music seemed to fade. Inside were papers. Not photographs. Not a farewell letter. Not some sad, sentimental memory he could use to make Mara look desperate. Papers. Legal papers. Callan's smirk weakened. He lifted the first page. His eyes moved across the heading. Emergency Board Resolution, Reedline Solutions. For 1 second, he did not understand. Then his jaw tightened. He lifted the second page. Notice of executive suspension pending investigation. His fingers stiffened. The room became quieter. He lifted the third page. Founder Rights Restoration, Mara Voss. A low murmur moved through the guests. Mara stood still. She did not smile. She did not speak. She only watched the truth reach him one page at a time. Callan lifted the fourth page. Notice of asset freeze request pending financial review. Now his breathing changed. Vast. Uneven. He looked at Dorian Hale. Then at Owen Bell. Then at Clara Mays, standing near the side aisle. Only then did he understand that this was not a threat. It had already started. His hand shook as he lifted the fifth page. This one was older, faded, creased at the corners. A copy of the Founder Protection Agreement signed 10 years earlier by Callan Reid, Mara Voss, and Ellis Voss. Mara's father. At the bottom of the page was Ellis's handwriting. Protect what she builds. For the first time that day, Mara almost broke. Not because of Callan. Because of her father. Ellis Voss had been gone for years, but somehow his careful love had reached this room before she did. He had seen what Mara could not see then. He had known that love without protection could become a cage. He had tried to leave her more than money. He had left her a way back to herself. Mara blinked once and held the tears where they were. Not here. Not for them. Dorian stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not perform. That made the moment even heavier. As of this morning, Dorian said clearly, Mara Voss has been restored in Reedline Solutions records as controlling founder owner, pending court confirmation of the disputed filings. Mr. Reid has been suspended from executive authority while allegations of financial misconduct and ownership concealment are investigated. The hall fell silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence where even people's breath sounded guilty. No music. No laughter. No whispers. Only Callan breathing too hard, still holding the papers he wished he had never touched. Sienna grabbed the documents from his hand. What is this? She snapped. She scanned the pages quickly, her eyes moving faster with each line. Her face changed in front of everyone. Confusion. Fear. Then calculation. Mara saw the exact moment Sienna understood. Callan no longer controlled Reedline. Callan no longer controlled the money. Callan no longer controlled the future she had dressed herself in white to claim. The room saw it too. And that mattered. Because Sienna's love did not crack from heartbreak. It cracked from loss of access. Callan turned on Mara, his voice low and sharp. You can't do this. Mara looked at him calmly. I didn't, she said. You did. I only stopped hiding the evidence. Owen stepped forward next. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. I witnessed company funds being used for private expenses, he said. When I questioned it, Mr. Reid threatened my position. Several guests turned toward Callan. Clara Mays stepped beside Owen. She had been quiet all evening, but now she looked directly at the board members. I was fired after reporting altered expense records, she said. Those records are included in the packet. Dorian added, preservation notices have been served. The supporting filings have already been submitted for legal review. No company funds may be moved without oversight. Then he pointed to the final section inside the silver box. Printed emails. Recovered messages. One line sat visible at the top of the stack. Once the divorce is done, make sure Mara can't touch the company. She'll never fight you, but don't leave loose ends. Sienna's own words. A woman in the second row gasped. Someone else whispered, that's from Sienna. Sienna stepped back as if the floor had shifted. Callan looked around the room for help. No one moved. Not the business partners who once praised him. Not the friends who laughed at Mara minutes earlier. Not the guests who came expecting a wedding and instead witnessed a man's public image fall apart before the vows. Callan reached for Sienna's hand. Sienna, he whispered, don't do this, not now. She pulled away. Her eyes were wet, but not with loyalty. You told me she had nothing, Sienna said. The sentence exposed her more than any document could. She did not ask, how could you hurt her? She did not say, "What have we done?" She said Mara was supposed to have nothing. Mara looked at Sienna, then really looked at her, her former best friend, the woman who had once adjusted her wedding veil, the woman who had once called her sister. There was no anger left strong enough to carry. Only clarity. Callan turned back to Mara. The confidence was gone now. His voice lowered into something almost pleading. "Mara, please, we can talk." For a moment, Mara saw the younger Callan again, the one in the empty office, the one who held her hands and promised her name would always be protected. Then she saw the man in the restaurant, sliding divorce papers across the table beside her birthday candle. Mara looked at the silver box, then at him. "We talked on my birthday," she said quietly. "Remember?" Callan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Behind him, Arthur Grant slowly closed his ceremony book. The wedding had not ended yet. But everyone in the room already knew there would be no vows. And outside the hall, the first courthouse notice was waiting to turn Callan's public humiliation into something far more permanent. Callan Reed chased Mara Voss out of the wedding hall with his undone vows still trapped in his mouth. Behind him, the beautiful wedding had collapsed into whispers, frozen faces, and half-empty glasses. The white orchids still covered the aisle. The gold chairs still stood in perfect rows. The cake still waited, untouched beneath soft lights. But there was no wedding anymore. Not because Mara had screamed. Not because she had begged. Not because she had ruined anything with anger. The truth had done it for her. "Mara," Callan called, his voice breaking as he reached the hallway. She stopped near the exit, the silver box held calmly in one hand. For the first time in years, Callan did not look powerful. His suit was still perfect, but his face was not. His eyes were wild, his breathing was uneven. Behind him, Sienna Vale stood at the entrance of the hall, no longer beside him, no longer touching him, no longer smiling like a woman who had won. Callan looked from Mara to the silver box. "Please," he said, "you don't understand. I can fix this." Mara turned slowly. That sentence almost made her laugh, but there was no joy in it. For 10 years, she had fixed what he broke. His contracts, his confidence, his company, his public image, even his lies, without knowing they were lies. Now he was asking her to save him from the consequences of his own choices. "You already had time to fix it," Mara said. "You used that time to hide more." Callan stepped closer. "Sienna manipulated me." From the doorway, Sienna's face changed. Even now, he was willing to throw her away if it helped him survive. Mara saw it clearly. That was who Callan had always been when comfort disappeared. Not strong, not loyal, only desperate. Over the next few weeks, Callan tried everything. He called Mara again and again. She did not answer. He sent messages. I was confused. She made me feel important. "You know who I really am." Mara read the last message once and closed her phone. Because she did know who he was now. She knew the man who accepted her father's money, then buried her name. She knew the man who used company funds on another woman, while his wife still reviewed his reports at breakfast. She knew the man who invited her to his wedding because he thought humiliation was closure. The legal hearing came quietly, without flowers, music, or guests pretending to be happy. The courtroom was plain and cold. Judge Elena Moore presided over the case. Judge Elena Moore was a woman in her late 50s with a calm face and sharp eyes. She was not there for emotion, she was there for facts, and for the first time, the facts stood on Mara's side. Dorian Hale presented the original Founder Protection Agreement. He showed the inheritance funding records. He showed the altered company amendments. He showed the missing waiver that Callan had pretended existed. He showed proof that Callan had moved marital assets during the divorce. He showed company expenses connected to Sienna. He showed witness statements from Owen Bell and Clara Mays. He showed the recovered messages Nolan Pierce had pulled from archived servers. Callan sat with his own lawyer, smaller than Mara had ever seen him. No cameras, no wedding guests, no boardroom applause. Just papers, dates, signatures, truth. When Judge Moore ruled, her voice was steady. Mara's founder rights would remain restored while the disputed records were corrected. Her controlling authority would stand. Callan would remain removed from company control pending further investigation. He would face sanctions for concealment during the divorce and misuse of company-linked funds. Additional review of Readline's accounts would continue. The divorce was no longer just the end of a marriage. It had become the legal correction of everything Callan tried to erase. Outside the courthouse, Callan approached Mara one last time. His tie was loose, his eyes were tired. He looked like a man who had finally met a door charm could not open. "I loved you before all this," he said. Mara looked at him for a long moment. She remembered the old office, the cheap coffee, the nights he cried in parking lots, the promises. Then she remembered the birthday candle beside the divorce papers. "No," she said softly, "you loved who I was when I made your life easier." Callan had no answer. That was her closure. Sienna disappeared from his life almost as quickly as she had entered it. Through her own lawyer, she released a short statement saying she did not understand the full financial situation. It was careful, selfish, cold. Mara was not surprised. Sienna had not stepped away from Callan because she found her conscience. She stepped away because the life she wanted was gone. Weeks later, Mara saw Sienna once in a parking lot. Sienna stood beside her car, thinner, paler, holding her phone like she wanted to say something. Mara saw the apology forming. She did not stop. Some betrayals did not deserve final conversations. At Readline Solutions, Mara did not become cruel. She became clear. She reinstated employee benefits Callan had cut. She restored Clara's reputation and offered her a senior accounting role. She promoted Owen to operations director. She created a policy protecting employees who reported misconduct. Then she funded a scholarship in her father's name for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal, divorce, or financial control. One morning, Mara returned to the old first office, the one from the photograph. The walls were different now. The floors were polished. The company had grown. But on her desk sat the framed picture from the beginning. Young Callan was in it. Young Mara was in it too. For years, she had looked at that photo and seen him. That morning, she saw herself. The woman holding a marker. The woman sitting beside the whiteboard. The woman who had always been there. The woman she had forgotten to honor. Mara opened the silver box from the wedding. Inside, she placed her wedding ring. Beside it, she placed the founder agreement. One symbol of what she lost. One symbol of what she reclaimed. Then she closed the box. The cruelest people often think love makes a person blind, but love had not blinded Mara forever. It had only delayed the day she finally saw everything clearly. Callan invited Mara to his wedding because he thought she was his past. He never imagined she would arrive as the owner of his future. And just as Mara turned off the office light, her phone buzzed with one final message from an unknown number. "Your father left you one more document." Mara stared at the message on her phone. Your father left you one more document. For a moment, the old fear returned. Not fear of Callan. Not fear of Sienna. Fear of discovering one more hidden wound from the past. Her fingers tightened around the phone as she stood alone in the quiet office. The lights were off now, except for the thin evening glow coming through the glass walls. On her desk sat the silver box from the wedding, closed again, holding both her wedding ring and the founder agreement. One symbol of pain. One symbol of protection. Mara called the number. A calm woman answered and introduced herself as Lena Park. Lena Park was a records manager from the small law office that had once handled Ellis Voss's personal papers. Her voice was gentle but professional, the kind of voice that made difficult news easier to receive. Lena explained that when Ellis helped draft the founder protection agreement years earlier, he had also left a sealed letter to be delivered only if Mara ever had to use that agreement. Mara did not speak for several seconds. Even after all these years, her father was still reaching back for her. Later that afternoon, Dorian Hale went with her to collect it. He did not ask questions. He only stood beside her, quiet and respectful, as Lena placed a thin envelope on the table. Across the front was her father's handwriting. For Mara, if love ever makes you forget your own worth. Mara's breath caught. She sat down before opening it. The letter was not long. Ellis had never been a man of too many words, but every sentence felt like his hand resting on her shoulder. He told her that love was beautiful when it was honest, but dangerous when it demanded that a woman disappear. He told her that helping someone build a dream was not foolish, but letting them erase her from it would be. He told her that if she was reading the letter, then something painful had probably happened. And then he wrote the line that finally broke her open. Do not use this paper only to take back what they stole. Use it to remember who you were before they convinced you to become smaller. Mara cried then. Not the helpless kind of crying from her birthday. Not the broken kind from the wedding invitation. This was different. This was grief leaving her body. For the first time, she was not crying because Callan had left. She was crying because she had finally come back to herself. The months that followed were not easy, but they were clean. Callan's name slowly disappeared from the company's daily life. The investigation forced him to repay misused funds. His board privileges were removed permanently. Former business partners stopped returning his calls. The same public image he had protected for years became the thing that exposed him most. He was not destroyed by Mara's anger. He was destroyed by his own records. That was the justice. Sienna did not get the life she had tried to steal either. Once Callan lost his company, she left him quickly and quietly. Her statement through her lawyer was cold and careful, claiming she had not understood the financial details. But everyone remembered her words from the wedding packet. Make sure Mara can't touch the company. No explanation could soften that. For a while, Mara thought she would feel happy watching them fall apart. But she did not. She felt something better. Free. One morning, Readline Solutions held its first employee meeting under Mara's leadership. The room was full of people who had once known her only as Callan's quiet wife. Now they saw her standing at the front, not shaking, not hiding, not asking permission to exist. Owen Bell stood near the first row as operations director. Clara Mays sat beside the finance team, restored to the position Callan had taken from her. Dorian Hale stood quietly at the back, arms folded, his face calm. Mara looked at them all and spoke simply. This company was built by more than one man's ambition. It was built by late nights, honest workers, careful hands, and people who kept going when no one clapped for them. From today forward, no one here will be punished for telling the truth. The room stayed quiet for a second. Then applause began. Soft at first, then stronger. Mara did not smile widely. She simply closed her eyes for one breath and let herself feel it. Respect. Not pity. Not gossip. Respect. Later, she walked alone through the old hallway where the first office photo had been taken. She stopped beside the whiteboard, now hanging in a glass frame. The old words were still there. Redialione SOLUTIONS, Phase 1. For years, Mara thought Phase 1 had been Callan's beginning. Now she understood. It had been hers too. She placed her father's letter inside the silver box, beside the ring and the agreement. Then she locked the box in her office drawer. Not because she wanted to forget. Because she no longer needed to carry the pain in her hands every day. That evening, as the sun lowered behind the company windows, Mara stood in her office and looked at her reflection in the glass. She was not the woman abandoned at a birthday dinner. She was not the ex-wife whispered about at a wedding. She was not the friend Sienna thought would never fight back. She was Mara Voss, founder, owner, daughter of Ellis Voss, a woman who had loved deeply, lost painfully, and still refused to become cruel. Her revenge was not that Callan lost the company. Her revenge was that he lost access to the woman who once made him believe he could become great. And her victory was not that everyone finally knew the truth. Her victory was that she finally believed it herself. Callan invited Mara to his wedding because he thought she was his past. He never imagined she would walk in carrying proof that she had always been the foundation of his future. And when the room went silent, it was not because Mara had become heartless. It was because, for the first time, she had stopped being invisible. What would you have done if you were Mara, walked away quietly, or exposed everything at the wedding? Share your thoughts in the comments and stay with us for the next story, because sometimes the person they underestimate the most is the one holding every receipt.